Well, hello everybody. It's Trevor Kerwin here again, Director of Partnerships from Shiva. Sorry for the bit of a late start, but technology is always fun. And I am here today, and this is a quick new format for us. For those of you out there who are used to tuning in and seeing us doing sort of longer form stuff, more webinar type of stuff here. And you're familiar with our podcasts and the rest of our content production. This is something we're doing a little more stripped down, so we can get right to the point as fast as possible. We're calling it 6Q4, 6 questions for a special guest. Today, that special guest is Chris Kane, executive growth consultant at Intelligent Demand. And Chris and I go way back, of course. For those of you who may not know, we've been kicking around the Bay Area and the tech scene for a while, and in content creation for a while. But Chris is a brilliant brand guy, and when we're talking about the world of connected cars now, that's what we really need to talk about: how this new platform is going to impact the world of the consumer. And
Wow, brilliant. You're really
how
setting the
about
bar high here, aren't you?
that?
Yes.
Chris, if you want to just say a brief intro to yourself, if you can improve on what I just said.
Oh, I couldn't possibly improve on brilliant. Yeah, no, Trevor and I have done many tour of duties in the IoT trenches, where we got to know a lot of the car manufacturers and their problems and their needs and their desires. I now work at a go-to-market agency. We work expressly with B2B tech companies, helping them drive revenue growth and be able to be more competitive in the market. And, we're always looking at new platforms for our brands to be able to access. And of course, one of those is connected cars.
Right, and that's the thing. I mean, this is so everybody knows out there in the audience. Like, this is right now. Obviously, we're interested in what consumers can do, and as Shiva, as a in-car transaction and location-based activation of hardware outside the car, as our bundle of technologies are, we it's a consumer, obviously it's consumer facing in the end, but right now it's primarily a B2B experience as we build out that infrastructure and those platforms. So without further ado on that, I gave Chris 6 questions before that we were going to run down, and he's given me some framework, but I imagine we'll probably riff a little bit. But let's kick it off. So Chris, you mentioned this. When you think, or when you and your firm think of the connected car, quote unquote, what do you think that means to consumers?
Well, for most consumers, let's be honest, it means where do I plug in my phone? That is sort of how they see connected car right now. And the brands, as they always do in every new platform, whether you're talking about banner ads or Web3 or the metaverse, the brands look at this initially as where can I slap my logo? So right now, it's at a very basic. If you ask 100 consumers what they think the connected car is, you'll get 105 different answers. But what's interesting right now is you're starting to see brands and car manufacturers get past that initial moment of happy fuzziness and are now starting to understand that this is a new beachhead to be able to get to the consumers at a place where they can drive really high urgency and intent. And you're starting to see that play out as you always do in land wars, where once partners are now becoming competitors. And we're seeing this most obviously in CarPlay, where several car manufacturers have announced that they plan to discontinue support of CarPlay. And the reason for that is they're realizing who wants to own that eyeball, who doesn't want to be disintermediated. And so when we think about how actual products and services are going to get out to market and have consumers understand what is actually happening at that head end, you're starting to see the beginning of it now. And it's going to be very interesting watching this battle over the eyeball. As someone who works with a lot of brands, this is sort of following the same path that retailers did. Retailers were giving up the ad space on their websites to ad networks and Trade Desk and people like that. And now you see Target and Best Buy and Kroger's and really Dick's Sporting Good are now building their own ad networks because they realize, wait a minute, that's my eyeball.
Right.
Why am I giving them to somebody else? So this is going to follow a very similar track to what's happening in retail right now.
Like to that point about Apple CarPlay, I think I mentioned it to folks at another event, saying, I think that the big automakers do not want to find themselves making $80,000 apps for Apple or Google, maybe, and they want to know that that's their world that they want to own, right? So, but now that we've said that, now we've kind of set that idea of like, okay, that's great. That's the infrastructure for how that's going to work. What are the connected car? What's the connected car going to mean to the? I mean, you touched on that with Kohl's and so on, and Kroger and Dick's Sporting Goods. But what's that going to mean to the brand itself? And what are they missing right now about that? How that platform might work?
Well, the funny thing is, I'm going to harken back to our Internet of Things days, and I know,
Do we have to?
yeah,
I'm looking at
back
yes,
back in the old IoT days.
yes,
So what was interesting there is, when you look at all these devices in the world of IoT, we don't see cars and planes and fuel pumps and stores. We just see nodes. Everything is a node. And what defines that node at that moment in time is the data that it's streaming off it, the intent and triggers, and what engagement you can do as a result of that. I've always stated that the single most valuable node in all of the IoT kingdom is the car. And the reason is it is moving through 3D space. It is streaming incredible amounts of data from all types of sensors and pieces of equipment. It is temporal. And what I mean by that is people are in that car for a reason. So intent is very easy to trigger. It's geolocated, and that taps into one of the services that Shiva delivers, which is your location and your fencing, plays directly into that. And what is incredible is you have so many data points that have high relevance at that moment for someone who is in a car at a certain place at a certain time. It is always for a reason. And that is incredibly powerful for brands if they can start to do that. But also be aware, and you've already touched on this, Trevor, that like what happens in many cases like this, you're going to see the first successes probably happen behind the scenes in B2B world. And then those will slowly filter out into the B2C world. So, for instance, if I'm Verizon and I want to understand the traffic that is happening over my network, if I understand where surges are happening, if I understand where holes are in my coverage, where I'm having problems supporting customers, each connected car with a Verizon wireless connection in it, if it has it, is basically a repair truck. It's basically a sensor on the move. Why can't the car company bundle that up and sell it back to Verizon? Why can't car companies, where every car knows the temperature, why can't you sell it to weather.com? So, there's going to be some sort of back end in support of customers solutions that I think will be the first ones that really have great success. And then we'll start tiering on top of that and getting to the actual consumer engagement.
right. Yeah, that's. I mean, this is some very key points, or what the one key point you mentioned there too. That the car for so many consumers right now is um, a, a tool to get you from point A to point B to do something else.
Right.
Yes, we're all aware that you can connect that's the issue, right? Apple CarPlay, so that adds a new dimension of being able to accomplish more things. But I think we're just at the cusp of
Yep.
understanding. Okay, that connected platform is going to make your life maybe more difficult, but hopefully much easier and smoother operating in the as times go on, as time goes forward. But around that, and the brands, and not just around the automakers themselves, but the brands that want access to that.
Mhm.
Consumer facing brands that are non-automotive, for the sake of discussion. What brands do you see leading the way in that, at the most sort of interesting in-car experiences?
Look, I mean, retailers, food, entertainment, hospitality, every person who gets in a connected car. And then when we get to full service driving, it's even better because now you've actually already signaled your intent. I want to go here. You can start layering data on top of that. You can start layering engagement on top of it. We see this with our phones, where people are trying to do in-app advertising. Where if I'm walking down a block where there's a Gap store, I'll get a Gap ad. delivered to my mobile app. Well, there's zero intent data. I could be walking down to go to that Gap store. I could be walking past the Gap store to get to a grocery store or a movie theater. It's like there's no intent there. There's no way to. Well, there may be, but there's no way to find it.
It's just
But
proximity.
right, but when you get into a car and you say, "I want to go here," oh my god, that is like intent that we would die for online. Where you can imagine someone going to Amazon saying, "I really need to buy running shoes." No, they search for running shoes, and you think to yourself, okay, maybe they're interested, maybe they're not interested. If they look at that shoe and then I'm gonna go chase them around the internet with retargeting and basically throw that Nike shoe onto every single website you go to for the rest of time. But the ability to signal intent when someone says, "I'm in this car to go do this," that is incredibly powerful for brands. And that kind of real time signaling is kind of the holy grail, especially with what I do in B2B, but also in B2C. To be able to know not just that someone is looking or shopping, but they are looking or shopping to do something right now.
Fair fair enough, and that's that. You know, context is critical. We think in this now. If you think about that, though, um, you know, we talk about the, we the third screen, TV, laptop, and smartphone. Smartphone screen. Well, now the TV is basically just a captured piece of glass for whatever else is streaming. So we think of the third screen. The new third screen is actually the car infotainment screen. And if you think about that, when you say those three screens, it's not just it's the three screens in your life. It's how you interact with those three screens, and
Mhm.
the way you interact with them is a little bit different or maybe a lot different, but is different. It's a different set of behaviors. So how
Yep.
much consumer behavior do you think we can get away with altering from how we use, say, a smartphone in our life versus the car infotainment screen? And how hard is it to guide consumers to make these changes? I mean, we've seen like Zevo, and it kind of didn't work. Where it's just like, hey, here's the apps. Now it's in your car. Like, okay, well, that's kind of ignores how I use it. It might
Right.
have ignored how I use the apps in the first place. Never mind how I use them in context of the car. But what do you think of it? Like, how hard is it to guide consumers that way?
So there's two answers to that will flip over time. So initially, and not surprisingly, this is kind of where Shiva has set up shop is the idea of using the screen originally and initially in the car as a way to trigger other activities in other screens, right? So, Shiva talks about, being able to go up to a pump and be able to just immediately trigger that payment. Well, now it's not me fishing around for my card. It's not knowing that, oh well, these pumps don't take Amex. I got to go find my Mastercard. And initially, I think being that hub of engagement and intent where you were playing alongside other screens, not as much replacing them. I think that's sort of where those initial wins are going to happen. Now, over time, as cars get autonomous and people start looking at not as a vehicle but as a space, I don't need to drive. I don't need to think about what I'm doing. I'm going to get in this thing and it's going to take me a place. As we start converting from a car being a vehicle to being a space that I inhabit for a fixed period of time while I'm going from point A to point B,
Right.
then all of a sudden I think you're going to see that invert. And that screen, that head end in the car is now going to become more primary interaction. So um, I'm in a autonomous car going to a concert, and the screen of my car starts saying, "Hey, have you thought about dinner? These restaurants around there have reservations after the concert." Now you're starting to become the point of primacy. So I think as we move from the autonomous car and the full self-driving, as we start becoming more a space and less a vehicle, I think that point of primacy will flip. But it's not going to happen initially. I think trying to people who think that when someone gets into a car, I can replace that phone screen now with a head end, and for that period of time, that's not going to be the primary interface. I think that's that to the point of altering behavior. I think that's trying to alter behavior too abruptly out of the gate.
So it'll take some time for us to get used to what you're basically saying. It's going to be I mean, the same way that your laptop and dumb phone behavior altered with the smartphone, or it wasn't just like, hey, here's a browser on this phone now and you can use it. And it took us some time to say like, well, I don't like to do that. Or Amazon, the first days of e-commerce, when you said like, oh, I'll buy a book from Amazon, but I won't buy a pair of pants because I can't try it on. Well, now like we've changed, we've altered those behaviors by by repetition and proof that I can get away, get the thing I get the thing I want to have happen. But that said, in the world of brands, we know all the have there's big successes and big failures. What do you think will be the things they'll try? Big brands will try first now that this new screen exists.
Oh, well, I mean, look, if there's one eternal truth in marketing, it's that we have a tendency to use new technology to do the dumb things more efficiently. And as a result, we all know what's going to happen. We're going to throw ads on the head end. That will absolutely be the first thing they try. Forcing behavior change too quickly, trying to be interruptive. It's like I just want to change the radio station for the love of God. Will you stop throwing me burgers? But it's going to happen. Brands are going to look at this as another place they can slap an ad, and they're going to go to work. And as the brands start pulling that head end away from people like CarPlay, I think that's where they're going to look. Wall Street is going to look to them and say, okay, so CarPlay isn't on there because you said you want to, sort of own the monetization. So show us the monetization. And the shallow end of the pool is going to be throw a bunch of ads on that head end.
Right.
And that'll be, we all talk about, hype cycles. And I think that will signal the beginning of the trough of disillusionment, as we like to say, will be when we slap ads onto every screen and make the buttons smaller on your touch screen and harder to interact with because you got to make room for that
Right.
McDonald's ad.
Right.
And it's going to take a while to kind of settle that down, which is why I think the the brands and the companies that kind of look at it twofold. How can we initially trigger engagement that is worthwhile and credible to the user, but also look at all the data coming off the car. Look at all that data being aggregated by your head and say, okay, who else in the B2B world would like this data in real time? Right? I mean, the amount of real-time streaming, geolocated, timestamp data that comes off a connected car, it's amazing. It's a gold mine. So I think the companies that are sort of careful and do that. The other thing, that could happen is we hub it even more. We take that data, push it out to advertising networks, and then circle back around to your phone.
Right.
So we're still using the car as the triggering element, but the output still is your phone.
Right. And I don't think we're ever going to get away from the idea that the screen in your pocket and the screen in your car that delivers you in your pocket to wherever you're going they're going to have some kind of interaction, whatever that looks like. They're not one's not a replacement for the other. So
Although
that's
I do think we will get there, right? But we get there when the car becomes a space we inhabit. Starbucks always talked about the
sure.
reason that they started Starbucks was that idea of a third space.
Mhm.
And I
And-
think ultimately, you know, fully autonomous connected cars will become a fourth space, a fifth space, whatever. And at that point, you know, do I want to pull out my phone and look at my itty bitty screen, or do I want to interact with this great big glorious head end screen in my car? I'm gonna pick the car.
right.
But so I do think we will get there.
Right. And that's what that you touched on the thing that I usually use here as a shorthand for what we do. It's third screen meets third space. In that Starbucks definition, and the EV world makes that even more so because you got a lot of quote downtime in your car as you charge, and that's not going to change. So we look at it and say you're going to be exploring your car's interior a lot more than maybe you
Yeah.
did in the past. So we're down to our last and sixth question. So we say there's a transition here from e-commerce, the first days of Amazon, pets.com, that whole fun time, and then to m-commerce, where you started making more decisions on your phone, and you were comfortable with making more decisions. This is the only context here, but just the comfort of using a smaller screen to make even bigger decisions, kind of like that Amazon thing I said, where like it's okay for books but not for clothes. Well, now I'm okay with clothes because in the whatever on the phone, I'm more comfortable as a consumer making decisions on this smaller screen. Car is going to be v-commerce, as we say, the next iteration of this. How much do you think, or what we might call e-commerce or m-commerce now, do you think will shift to cars?
I think over time a a large chunk will shift. However, to be clear, I don't think that people will be increasing the shopping they do in their car, but I think the knowledge the car has gained from you will be fed out to third parties that will then be able to trigger more high intent, more targeted advertising commerce moments that are likely to drive higher engagement.
Right.
So, I think as a aggregator of incredible intent data that can then be fed to other sources, I think car influenced commerce, shall we call it? I think will actually play a major role. Again, is one of the major spaces that you interact with, and I would argue that because the intent that happens when people get into a vehicle for a certain reason at a certain time, I would say it's more valuable than, well, he went to Amazon the last 5 times and looked at this. Um, I don't know what the intent is. Maybe you went and bought something in real life. Maybe you bought something off another store. That ad's still chasing me around though.
Right.
I've had ads chase me around from a retailer where I actually did buy the product, and the damn ad is still chasing me around. So I think that precision to find those moments in time where you're likely to trigger the highest engagement. I think the data coming off cars will be incredibly powerful for that.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, thanks again, Chris Kane, uh, executive growth consultant for Intelligent Demand, and a longtime friend of myself and Shiva. And again, just a little bit about ourselves. Shiva, leading in-car transaction platform via the car's infotainment screen. We activate for parking, EV charging, fueling outside the car. We turn on the pump, the charger, add time to the parking meter, all from the comfort of the car's infotainment screen. Any questions about what we do or what Chris does, feel free to add them in the comments. We'll be back here with more of these types of quick interviews, we hope, and soon. So, again, Chris, thanks a lot, buddy. And
And also, will you please cut a deal with the city of San Francisco, because we have the most inscrutable electronic parking meters. Every day I walk down the street and there's just people just staring at the thing going, I have no idea what to do. So if you could fix that first, I would be forever beholden to you.
Duly noted. I will. That is probably a 6 questions for the future, because let's just say parking is a fragmented marketplace that does need a lot of smart folks are trying to figure it out. So, and we're just one group of those smart folks, we hope. But yes, that is there's a whole new world too, because again, Chris and I's background in IoT around smart cities too. There's a whole aspect of what
Yep.
cities are missing on that. It's like the only way your city knows you is to send you a tax bill or a parking ticket. What else do
Yeah.
you know about me? Because I like to do a lot of things. I live here for a reason, right? So, what do you do for that? But great, and I actually, you know what? Oh no, there's been a thank you very much, Sachin. I thought it was going to be a question, but it's a comment and a positive one. Thank you. And thanks to everybody out there who's been paying attention. Please reach out and leave us something in the comments. Chris and I are going to follow up with a little bit of a back and forth in the comments, kind of an overtime. Ask me anything.
Yep.
It'll be a reiteration of what we talked about here today. So
Good.
you'll be read
We're
out.
ready.
All right. All right, guys. Thank you. And also my colleague Jack Van Way behind the scenes. Thanks, Jack. And you can read us out, buddy.